Hello there, and welcome to another episode of The Metagame, the live streaming show here on the Dice Tower, where the YouTube chat and I will discuss not only board games, but discussing board games. And today is going to be, I'm really excited about today's show. So as soon as I get confirmation from our friendly neighborhood chat window, which is now open and in front of me, that you guys can actually see me and actually hear me, we'll get started with the television type of program here. All right, thank you, Satya, and Kabuki for the confirmation that the audio and the video is good. So, in case this is your first time joining us for the metagame, here's the premise of this program. I am going to host a topic of discussion, something about board games, or even about the act of podcasting and discussing board games. And together, along with the live YouTube chat, I'm going to go back and forth with the chat window throughout the discussion. And I'm going to take questions and comment and read comments and other things that people have submitted in the chat window. If you are following along in the YouTube chat and have a question, a comment, a statement, or anything that you would like considered for inclusion on the show, be sure to add our handy dandy hashtag TMG for the metagame to your YouTube chat post. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my web browser's search tool to highlight that hashtag, so all of the YouTube chat statements that include it will kind of float to the top, and I'll see those. Now, like I mentioned, this show is not only about talking about board games, but also sometimes talking about board games. I'm really excited about today's show because we had one of the events in the board game industry and community this week that is just like tailor-made for this program. And so we're going to be talking about, there's stuff, there's big board game news, and the way that the board game news was handled by the online board gaming community led to more news. So we have the whole gamut here to cover. And so I'm really excited to see what becomes of today's discussion. And speaking of which, I'm really hoping that today's episode is a very conversational one. I'm going to try and go back and forth between the comments and hopefully really keep up with the comments to have kind of a nice back and forth rapport going on here. Anyway, so first of all, what is the big news that started this week? Well, it seems to me that the biggest news story of the week was an upcoming board game that was announced from not a board game publisher, but a video game developer called Riot Games. And they are going to develop a game called, it works, Mechs and Minions. I wanted to do a little extra prep for this episode, so I actually went out and got some extra media stuff to put in this episode. So cool, it works. If you guys can actually see something right here, it works, I should say. Okay, so who cares? A video game person, company's making a board game. So what? Well, let's get a little background on where these people are coming from and how this changes their approach to what they're developing and how people are inferring this. Okay, first of all, Riot Games, for those who don't know, is a company that runs an online game called League of Legends. And this game, it's like one of those free-to-play, the microtransactions to upgrade new skins and other things for your characters and stuff like that. And in this business model that they have, showing kind of one of the differences between the video game and board game industries, this business model that they have earns their company like $1.6 billion a year. In 2005 or 2015, their company revenue, I believe, was something like $1.6 billion. To provide some perspective in the difference there, I heard Tony Topper from the Secret Cabal in a Secret Cabal Express episode number 18. He mentioned that, quote, that amount of revenue is nearly double the annual revenue of the entire board game industry. So every board game company, the amount of money they make in a year is about maybe half of what this one video game company brings in a year. So right there, we see the stage being set differently. So, okay, so now we have this video game company that doesn't need the board game industry's money. So why are they going and making this board game? I mean, I see this as something like Apple going and spending the amount of time and resources to perfect a bobsled simulator app in order to lure into its iPhone users pool the proportionately small population of bobsledders that are out there that haven't yet bought iPads. So, because one of the reason I mention that is because when Riot Games started this endeavor, they spent like over a year developing this board game, which is not uncommon. But then they reportedly brought in Tom Vassell and Quentin from Shut Up and Sit Down, and had these board game reviewers review and play test the game with them. And then after receiving their feedback, realized, oh, we have some improvements that we can make to this game. So they went and took another year and a half after that to go and retool everything. So that's a lot of time and resources and energy to pump into this game. And I've heard some online chatter when the game was announced, which we'll get to the game announcement a little bit later. But when the game was announced, I heard some cynical online chatter of, oh, here's just a board game, or here's just a video game company that wants to get, a slice of the board gamer pie. And again, with the amount of time and energy and resources that the company already has available, that's why I again draw the parallel that I don't think that's their ultimate motive here. Again, I don't think it's like Apple trying to get that, iBobsled app to get the little tiny population that's out there, in this case board gamers or bobsledders, to go and shell out more money for their video game or their iPads or something. So if they're not doing it just to reap the rewards of this sweet, sweet board gamer audience, then why would they do it? And the interviews and such that I've listened to, and some of the other conversations I've heard regarding Riot Games' approach to developing this, is they basically are also lovers of board games. And some people believe that, some people don't. Listening to the interviews that I've heard so far, it's hard not to come away with that same point of view, listening to them speak about the industry. And essentially what they wanted to do was they wanted to develop, first of all, a fun game that might not be for everybody, but a fun game that was basically a deluxe or premium edition of a game at the standard board game price. And the manner by which they did this, in terms of their manufacturing and their upcoming distribution, is what we'll talk about in a few minutes, because that's kind of the next crux of this conversation. But for now that I've introduced the topic for the show and kind of reintroduced this Mechs and Minions game and how it came to be in the first place, I want to go back to the chat and I want to get people's initial, before I say anything else about the game or what's been said about it, I want to go back to the chat and I want to get your guys' initial thoughts. What's your initial thoughts about what you've seen and heard about this Mechs and Minions? Have you even seen or heard anything about it yet? Is it not as big a deal as it appeared to be to me? Or is it something that interests you, or is you still have questions about that? It's like, well, I don't understand what they're doing here. Or is the way that it's being the company that's developing it, does that give you pause in terms of the game's quality? Those type of initial gut reactions. We have this opportunity. We have this moment in time right now where no one else has really seen much about the game. All we've seen is the content that's been out there so far. So I want to get your guys' gut reactions. All right. To do that, I got to go over to the chat area. So let me do my search. All right. All right, there is a lot of comments here today. And so I'm going to try to find a good starting spot here. People are talking about whether it's going to sell out. Okay, oh, here we go. Oh, let me just back up a little bit more here. Sorry. Just over, okay. All right, we're going to start with a comment from Nyrus Interactive. Hello. And because I think this is a good starting point in the conversation here. Nyrus mentions that Riot Games has definitely piqued my interest. I believe that announcing it so soon to release, so soon to its release, actually worked for them because it has high quality components and a low price point. That's something else to mention here. The game, Mechs vs. Minions, is going to be released mid-October. So we're about all the information released about a month prior. Now, the goal, as I understand it, Riot's goal was to announce nothing. There was to be no information about this game released whatsoever prior to this last Monday's announcements. So they took this this approach that was much different. Usually in our board game world, as soon as a designer's working on a game and it's, as soon as they have enough of it put together where they can announce it, it seems like they want to get the buzz out there, to get people interested. This seemed to be a very counterintuitive approach almost to the board game, to our board game world, where they sat on it until the last moment possible and then it was like, boom, dropped it, which I thought was very interesting. And I've actually, surprisingly, seen mixed results, mixed response to that. And that's one of the things we'll get to. But let's continue on with the chat. Michael mentions, to me, it's more interesting to see if other video game studios and TV studios, etc., will follow suit. That is something that I have been wondering as well, Michael, which we'll get to kind of in the third act of the conversation. But it's definitely interesting to see a non-board game designer stepping in and seeing what they come up with when it comes to board game design. None of the bias, design bias of previously published games or what your direct competition is doing, but more this completely fresh outside perspective coming in. Let's see here. And Michael continues, lots of bad IP games do get printed. But if this is truly a possible new business model, then they would want to produce good IP, intellectual property, related to games. And Kabuki Kid continues, I also heard at least one big board gaming personality claim that they heard the game is somewhat average from some who played it already. It could possibly be something of a letdown too. Completely possible. I know in the interviews that I listened to, the representative from Riot Games, Chris, he mentioned that they went into this to design a game for a very specific audience. They weren't trying to make a gateway game for everyone. They had a specific type of player in mind. So since there are so many different types of players, that's one thing that could definitely be a letdown. That's one of the unfortunate side effects of a game that is hyped with this level of hype that we've seen this week and leading into this week, is that if a product is designed for a very specific user group, the more hype and information about this product that is made available prior to its release, Well, you're going to get more and more people that are outside of that target user group that get excited about it, which can lead, of course, to people being the people that are outside of that target user group getting let down about the game when it's eventually released. The more hype and the more people outside of that user group that you get excited about the product, you can therefore then see what would seem like an artificially high amount of disappointment. Even though if fewer people knew about it and they were excited about it and they were in the core audience, you'd see an artificially high seeming amount of success about it. But if you bring in all these other people that aren't excited, that it's not for, you have a larger percentage of the audience potentially being disappointed. So this hype machine can work against itself in that respect. And I think we saw a little bit of that this week, where some people, there was some of the response going, oh, that's it? And, it's kind of a give and take. Something you have to balance out. But let's continue on to the next comment here, again by Nyrus. I'm going to try and clip through a few of these to kind of catch up to the gut reaction stuff. So I'm going to try my best not to rabbit trail too much on my responses here. Nyrus mentions, do people think it will sell out on the first day? I hear some games don't even go past 5,000 units in sales. I believe that Riot Games is going to produce a total quantity of 30,000 units of this game, I believe in 2 batches of 15,000. 15,000 releasing in October and then another 15,000 coming soon thereafter. Will it sell out on the first day? That is something I don't know. That is something, though, I am super excited and interesting to find out, because I don't know. I want to know, because the way that they are doing their distribution model is completely different. Again, which we'll get to in the next portion of this that I'll discuss. But if I could see them selling a few thousand on the first day, I could see them selling out completely. I personally have no idea what to expect. But I do know that a lot of people are going to be watching to see what happens. And it's going to be fascinating to see. Sacha mentions, while it did not blow my mind at all, and you know what I'm going to do? I actually got some pictures here. Here is, while I read some comments, here is an example of what the game components look like. Okay, it comes with this sand timer over here. It's got literally hundreds, almost maybe, of minis in it. Some of them pre-painted. The others have a wash already on them. Multiple boards and cards. It's kind of a card programming game. I've heard it described as a combination between Robo Rally and Descent. So here's kind of an idea of the components of the game that we're dealing with. I'm going to leave this up on screen while I read a few more comments. Sasha mentions, while it did not blow my mind at all, I think it must be a good game based on the Dice Tower reviews and the live play yesterday. That's right, the Dice Tower did a live play on their YouTube channel. It's just not the game for me. And there you go. Darth mentions, tossing out here what should be a softball question. What's the difference between League of Legends Quick Announce and Distribute and the Quick Announce and Distribute of the Oregon Trail card game? Darth, I'm going to have to swing and miss at that softball question because I am not up to speed enough on the announcement and distribution of the Oregon Trail card game. I did hear of it, especially since I'm in Oregon and I played the Oregon Trail computer game growing up. But I'm not sure what kind of quick turnaround time they had and how that affected it. So that is something I'm going to go and find out more about, because that comparison between the two and the results that come in from those two, that could be a very interesting comparison. So thank you for bringing that up. However, Kabuki Kid comes to the rescue here to mention that Darth, I'd say, this being Kabuki Kid saying, I'd say the difference is that this game is obviously pointed at the hobby market and not the mass market like target games are. Oh, there we go. There's one difference right there. Let's see here. All right. Kabuki Kid mentions something I haven't mentioned yet, the price point. The League of this Mechs versus Minions game is slotted to have a $75 price point. I mentioned that their goal, from what I understand, was to make a premium deluxe board game components-wise, but sell it at a standard board game price. And Kabuki mentions that an amusing tidbit is that the League of Legends players are in their forums saying that they think $75 sounds incredibly high for a board game. And the board gaming gang thinks it's a steal. So yes, it's really interesting to see the different perspective here. Hello again. Benjamin mentions, I wonder how much of their sales will come from League of Legends players who are looking for a direct port of their game and how that will affect the public reviews of the board game. Yes, again, the audience that we're dealing with here, the potential audience that we're seeing, especially since Riot Games with League of Legends has a captive audience of their video game crowd. They have, every time you log into this game, I'm sure that you will see something about Mechs and Minions mentioned, advertising it. So there is this potential to have a large influx of non-traditional, core board gamers brought into the fold, which will bring a completely different perspective. Is it their target market? Well, again, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in mid-October when this is released and we start to see this influx of sales and public consumer reviews and feedback. All right, so let's refresh the comments here real quick. And I'm just going to try and grab a couple here because it looks like... Okay, we have a comment here from David who says, computer games into board games isn't something new. What is new here is that Riot went themselves and didn't partner with an existing company. That's true. All of this was designed and developed in-house. They didn't partner with existing established board game publisher or anything. They did all of this in-house, which is really pretty interesting that they just wanted to do it and they figured out how to do all of these bits and pieces themselves. David also mentions, the only other thing I can think of that's close is that when Blizzard canceled the World of Warcraft TCG to go with their online CCG Hearthstone. Yeah, and Blizzard, see now, I think that we can draw some additional parallels between Blizzard and Riot in that I know that Blizzard has a reputation of doing two things. One, if a game is not coming out the way that their original vision for it, and that doesn't match their original vision, I know that Blizzard has no qualms with canceling a project, even if there has been years of development in it. I know that Blizzard has no qualms with just killing a project if it's like, nope, this is a bad lead, bad development going on here. It's not going the way we want it to. It doesn't match our artistic vision. They will cancel it. I've seen them do that with at least several different properties. Additionally, Blizzard has a mantra. When people ask, hey, when is this game going to be released? Blizzard's mantra is, it'll be released when it's done. And they have, just by their own reputation and their own, the way they've established themselves, Blizzard has given themselves the luxury of not being a slave to, the convention seasons or, those type of productions. Blizzard can produce something when it's done. And Riot, with their backing with League of Legends, Riot had this same luxury where they were able to have this game be done when it's done. I mean, think about it. It's coming out in mid-October. They're not, as I believe, they're not taking it to Essen or anything, so it's not going to be like an Essen release there. Correct me if I'm wrong. But they missed Origins. They missed Gen Con. They didn't, they're releasing it in October. And so it's one of those things where because of the financial foundation that they have with League of Legends, they were able to produce this completely on their own timeline and take the Blizzard approach of it's done when it's done. Okay, speaking of getting things done, now that it is done, I've talked about some of this stuff already now in my notes, so I'll try not to repeat it. Okay, so now that it's done, we have them finally announcing it publicly. Now, from what I heard, I mean, the interviews, they were working on it for at least a year. Then a year and a half ago, they brought in Tom Vassell and Quentin from Shut Up and Sit Down, and then retooled it for a year and a half after their conversations and playtesting. So at least 2.5 years this game was being worked on. And in that time, nobody heard anything. They explicitly went out of their way not to have any word spread about this game. So let's kind of compare that. Like I've mentioned before, it seems like lots of times many publishers, because of the amount of competition in this industry, will announce things as soon as possible to start getting the buzz out there. A lot of times, I know that when a board game publisher produces a board game, they will, of course, they have to go to press with it, and they have to send it off to Panda Publishing or someone in China, usually somewhere, some overseas printing company to print up copies, which are shipped over on a big cargo boat across the ocean when they're done printing. However, what they'll usually do, and that whole process of shipping it and everything, that can take months. But what they will do is they will pay the money to fly out, ship via air real quickly. They'll fly out a small pallet full of games as soon as they're printed. So then they'll use those for their marketing purposes. They'll give them to reviewers and other things. So, and the reviewers, of course, the people whose bread and butter and viewership and subscriber base is based on, getting these views and having the information that people are waiting to see, they will be anxious to get their media content posted as soon as possible. So you have these advanced copies coming out, and we're starting to see board game reviews come out 1, 2, 3 or more months before the game is actually available to the public, just because of this lag time in shipping and production and getting those copies out, and the reviewers wanting to be first. So in this, again, this is something that we have grown accustomed to in the board game industry. And Riot Games' approach was completely counterintuitive to this. They waited till about a month before the release, before people were supposed to say anything. There was a gag order or a information embargo. I think that's the official word for it. So basically, there was this embargo against publishing anything. And it was supposed to be something like, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time this past Monday was when people were allowed to finally say something. And when 11:30 a.m. on Monday came along, within 10 minutes of that time period, boom, all these publishers, all these reviewers and board game content media makers who had been working on their videos published everything at once. And which is something that surprisingly, in a way, seemed to backfire a little bit. And that's what I want to talk about here. So the next thing I want to chat with the chat is going to be how the blitz of videos and podcasts that came out on Monday, how that colored your perception of the game. Did you even know there was a blitz of content? Which we'll get to there's so much stuff here to talk about. Did you even know there was a blitz of content? Did you see it? Did you absorb it all? Was there too much to absorb? Did it make it seem like a little too coincidental that everybody released their content at once? That's what I want to find out, because here's what happened. Okay, so this interesting phenomenon is you had at least five prominent board game YouTube channels and podcasters all released their content, about the game, not only on the same day, but like I said, within 10 minutes of each other. So this simultaneous release of information, it had this fascinating, unexpected result. Some people became suspicious and skeptical of the integrity of the content. Some people like, oh, look at these corporate shills. They all got paid to say all this at the same day and the same time. But if we stop, and in my opinion, think about it, it's not because of being corporate shills that are on the payroll of this company to be hired to do this marketing stuff. It's because of the natural competition that has developed within our industry to be the first one to talk about this, these awesome new toys that we all get excited about. So the result is everybody was sitting there ready and waiting to post their content as soon as that gag order was lifted. And when they did, boom, 2 podcasts, 3 video reviews, all this stuff went up. And everybody, well, not everybody, and a lot of people were excited, but a few people were like, wait a minute, this is just too weird. I saw a tweet this week from one well-known board game reviewer channel who tweeted that they actually midweek took their content that they had produced about the Mechs and Minions game, they took it down because, quote, whatever's going on is just a little too suspicious. All right. So now, do you agree with me on that? Is it, is the motivation of people just to get their content out first, to get the views, to get the subscriptions, to get the eyeballs looking on their content before they go and look at someone else and get their information from somewhere else? Or is it because there was this master plan conspiracy? Another thing I want to mention about this, which I thought was hilarious about this, I mentioned that primarily on Monday morning, there was a collection of just about 5 YouTube channels and podcasts that released content about the board game at the same time. And some were suspicious and some called it information overload. And I wonder if Apple receives this type of reaction when they release their upcoming iBobsled app that we talked about. When there's a new iPhone released, the amount of content that simultaneously drops out there dwarfs, like the sun dwarfs a grain of sand, the amount of information that our board game industry media makers produce. There's a comparison here that I wanted to make between what the board game world is used to dealing with and what the video game world is used to dealing with. Okay, so here's a comparison. I was doing some research this week, and Gen Con, which is the, if not the largest, at least the largest board gaming convention in the United States. Gen Con 2016 attendance was about 60,800 people. Okay, so 60,800 people attended Gen Con. That is an amazing amount. That is, all the publishers are there, all the reviewers are there. The entire, so many people from the board gaming community are there, playing games, buying games, cosplayers, role players, all these different people who love board games are there sharing this hobby together. Now, the most recent, by comparison, let's take one of the largest conventions for the video game industry. E3, the Electronic Entertainment Expo, which I believe takes place in May each year. E3, the most recent numbers I have for E3 are from 2015, where 52,200 people attended E3. And that made me pause. Go, wait a minute. I'm talking about how I'm talking, the whole crux of my argument is how much bigger the video game industry is than the board game industry. Now I'm saying that 60,000 board gamers attended Gen Con, but only 52,000 people attended E3? It's like, have we outgrown the video game industry? No. After puzzling that for a few minutes, I realized that, no. The difference here, E3 had 52,000 people attended. However, E3 is not a public event. It's not open to the public. I got a quote from the website here. Only professionals from the industry are allowed to attend E3. So individuals who are not able to document their direct and current professional affiliation to the interactive entertainment industry are not qualified to attend E3. So basically, what I'm saying here is Gen Con had 60,000 people attend it. That includes publishers, reviewers, fans, everybody. E3 had 52,000 people attend it. It's only the publishers and the reviewers. So if you were to take just the board game publishers and reviewers and have a convention just for them, you could probably have it take place in a Motel 6 ballroom. Much smaller. So just the press, just the developers and the press for the video game industry is 52,000 people at this convention. So in the board game industry, when 5 prominent board game channels and podcasts simultaneously release their information, it's almost comical how that seems like, oh my gosh, there's something going on. This is too suspicious. There's some weird payoff going on here because they all release their content at the same time. Compared to the video game industry where like Riot comes from, if you had only 5 people on day one release simultaneous content about your product, it would be a miserable, horrific failure. If you had 5,000 simultaneous websites and producers release content about your stuff on day one, maybe you would survive. But the difference here in the scales that we're dealing with, that the board game audience just isn't used to, which is a really neat thing about our hobby. It's just, though, it's at the same time, the human nature aspect of it is fascinating. So anyway, let's return to the chat. I want to know your reaction. Did you notice the media blitz? Did you care? Did it make you more interested? Did it make you less interested? Let's return to the chat here. And again, it's kind of hard for me to sync up the chat sometimes, so I apologize. All right. My chat window is telling me it's mad at me. I'm sorry. All right, let's go up here. Here's where a cluster of comments start. All right. They start, as usual, with Kabuki here. Kabuki mentions a lot of people definitely thought that their favorite board game reviewers were suddenly shilling for Riot. So there we have a common commenter at the show who provides a lot of helpful assistance and comments to the community we have here. Even also noticed this perception of shilling for Riot. Louise mentions, it made no difference to me, but I'm used to this review embargo because a review embargo is common to the video game industry. Okay, there we go. Comparison of different industries. Chuck mentions, had no impact on my decision, as it never does. I make my decisions on the gameplay and not the hype. It looks like a lot of fun to me, so I'm excited to have it in my collection next month. Another viewer from overseas mentions, it seemed all staged to give a big bunch of publicity all at the same time. And I'm sure that the reviewers got their quote-unquote something from Riot to talk about it. Again, the purpose of this program is to foster the discussion. I would be interested in knowing what that something is, because I'm not going to jump to conclusions. I'm not going to put words in your mouth. But if you can follow up what that something is, I'd be interested in fleshing that out a little bit more, just to fill in the gaps so I myself and others aren't jumping to conclusions thinking, oh, that something was a free copy of the game, or that something was an island in the South Pacific that they gave them. That's their own private island. Kind of a something leads to a lot of speculation. So if we can flesh that out, I'd be interested in finding out kind of what the thought there was. Murr mentions, I knew about the Blitz. I watched a lot of it, and now have a reminder in my calendar software to tell me when I can buy the game. So it worked for me based on the reviewers. Nothing negative here. Okay. So it actually helped. Hey, it helped. We know that definitely made a calendar item to remember to go buy the game. So I guess that's the whole point of marketing, isn't it? So there we go. BD Mason mentions, embargoes are good for everyone as long as the embargo is well before the release date. Total Biscuit has commented about this in the game industry many, many times. Good point. Nathaniel mentions, I felt it was strange that Riot only put the game into the hands of board game reviewers, not those reviewers dedicated to miniatures games. Oh, that is interesting, Nathaniel. That's... Again, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but that is a good question. Is it because miniatures gamers aren't the target market that they see for Mix versus Minions? Or is it because they only had so many copies of the game to go around? Or is it just where their mindset was? That's an interesting point. And again, it's one I don't know the answer to, but it would be really interesting to find out why did they choose the certain reviewers that they did, which is cool. I know that I've heard them mention on the interviews I've heard that they kind of came into this only knowing like the Dice Tower and Shut Up and Sit Down and stuff. And then from those prominent board game media developers, they got referrals and stuff, and it kind of rippled out from there. And a lot of the people that they have met in the industry, they met through referrals. One person mentioning, hey, if you talk to me, you also want to talk to this guy. And so maybe it's just kind of the people they first came to and the people that those people know. But that's a good question. Sasha mentions, if not for the announcement on the Dice Tower forum about this game about to be announced, I would not have paid much attention. They just released the info in a different way to what we're used to. Good point. Nikolai mentions, this is standard operating procedure in video games. So it makes sense that Riot, a video game company, would continue that way. I agree. I totally agree with that. Standard operating procedure for new product release in, not just the video game industry, but many, many different industries. It's one of the ways, I think, actually, that the board game industry is actually kind of unique. We have such a small, tight-knit community in a lot of ways. A lot of our hype and a lot of our marketing is word of mouth from the community members, sharing things that we get excited about. And it is a different approach, but it also is a different community that we have. And it's really neat how we have this thing. So I don't know how long our community and our industry will stay that way, but at the time being, it does kind of seem to me, it makes what we have somewhat unique and special. Andrew mentions, nope, it did not seem coincidental. It seemed planned. They were excited to have the scoop. If the game wasn't worth sharing, then media personalities wouldn't be willing to share so quickly. It's a good point. I'm reminded of Tom Vassel's closet of games, his queue that he talks about frequently. And sometimes the games in the queue, they keep getting pushed back and keep getting pushed back. And some of them never get reviewed. I know there's a couple of games I specifically have waited for over the years that ended up never coming out of his queue and just evaporating out of it eventually. So if a game, if you're not excited to talk about this game, we have seen direct examples of that game getting pushed back and not talked about at all because better and more interesting stuff does come along. Let's see here. Slight jump here. Wes mentions, the blitz of content definitely, to me, made it seem like the reviewers were, quote, in the pocket of the game's producers, and that positive reviews were going to happen regardless of the game's merit. Hey, it's Joel Eddy from Drive Thru Review joining us. Hi, Joel. Good to see you. That's, okay, Wes, so again, that is kind of the whole purpose of this part of the discussion. There's another person that did kind of seem put off by it because it seemed like it made the reviewers in the pocket of the game. And so we're seeing maybe here a 80% positive, 20% negative split perhaps on it, which isn't surprising. But I'm going to take just a couple more comments here, then I'm going to go to the third part of the discussion. Nyrus mentions, the blitz was odd, but everyone seemed excited about it, and I trust most of the reviewers I watch. So I agree with the being first agenda. That's another very good point. I mean, myself included, to some extent, I mean, hopefully to the full extent, the content producers for the board game industry, the reviewers and everyone, all of us that are creating podcasts and YouTube content, our integrity as someone who is a reviewer is the fundamental cornerstone that our brand has to be based off of. If a reviewer loses their integrity, they're done. Nothing they say matters anymore, and nothing will be listened to. And I know a lot of reviewers go very far out of their way to protect this integrity, whether it's consistently reminding people, hey, I'm telling you the truth, and I'm going to say whether a game is good or bad, or refusing to actually have a public opinion stated about games, and saying, I don't review, I just provide instructional content or stuff like that. All of these people go out of their way to protect the cornerstone of their integrity, because without that, they'll be gone tomorrow and everyone will stop watching. So, Nyrus, I agree with that. That level of trust is something that certain audience members, perhaps, that 20% that's like skeptical, that they have to lean on that trust of, do I trust the relationship I formed with this reviewer? Do I trust what they're saying at this point? And I'm not saying they have to, I'm not saying they should or shouldn't. It's just an interesting result of this. Okay, one more comment. I gotta go back to the next part. BD Mason mentions, embargos allow all reviewers to get a chance to get their content ready, which allows everyone to produce a quality review instead of rushing a review to get the first scoop. Boy, howdy, that is true. Because the rush to get everything done is one of the things that seems to plague, that's one of the bad things that seems to plague our board game industry. With our Origins and Gen Con and Essen, these large conventions where the bulk of the board game products are produced and released each year, there's only so many different printing companies out there. Like, for example, the primary one is Panda. And I know with Panda printing, every year, board game publishers have to submit their final files to Panda further and further and further in advance in order to get added to Panda's queue to get their product printed in time for these conventions. So they're having to work backwards farther and farther. And another thing exacerbating this whole issue is, like, let's take, for example, Essen. Essen, a few years ago, there was 600 to 650 games released at Essen. Now, just a couple years later, what's this year's estimate? Some people are saying 1,000 to 1,200 games, almost double in just a few years, almost double the amount of board games are being released at this one convention. But the amount of printers out there that are available hasn't doubled. So more and more products are being funneled through these same production resources, which leads to that constant rush to get everything done and out there. Okay, so let's talk about the distribution model to wrap this up, because this is one thing I want to know, another thing. And this might be something to continue in another episode perhaps in the future, but let's just, I want to just mention that. I've mentioned that from the interviews I've listened to, Riot's approach, their passion for producing a game, they wanted to produce a fun game that they enjoyed, that was a deluxe or premium edition of a game at a standard board game retail hobby market price. So in order to do this, Riot is circumventing distributors and friendly local game shops. They are going to be selling the game through their website and only through their website. Now, by taking a distributor out of the equation, that helps reduce the cost of the game by at least like a third or so, which helps bring it down to this price point. However, again, our industry, our board game hobby is such a tight-knit little microcosm that I can't help but wonder, every time you make someone happy, you make someone else upset. And now we've seen a lot of talk with other large publishers changing the rules this year for friendly local game shops and online retailers and distributors. We've seen people, we've seen companies establish different rules for online retailers in order to, quote, help keep the friendly local game shops alive. Because friendly local game shops apparently are where people come to find out about this hobby and how it thrives, which is a statement that was said. So what Riot's doing with this game that's built up so much hype, they purposefully, tried to make as big an impact with the resources they have available to, release the information and get people excited about this game, but they are going to exclude the industry norms, the distributors, and the friendly local game stores from getting a slice of this pie. The end result to bring the price point down for the consumer. So here we have this very large, this financially stable video game developer coming in, potentially disrupting our industry with this. Is what we're seeing, is the approach to marketing and distribution, I should say, is the approach to sales and distribution that Riot is doing here. Is this something that is going to spark a revolution in the way other games are marketed, sold, and distributed in our industry, and unleash new ideas, showing people, hey, you can do a game this way? Or is Riot's approach going to ultimately maybe be interesting for now, but a couple of years from now, is it ultimately going to be detrimental to our industry? Is this going to, if this game is successful, is this actually going to damage our distributors and our friendly local game stops to the point where it does more damage to them than it actually helps? I'm not voicing an opinion on this. I am just curious, and I'll be keeping an eye on it. But that's why I want, does anyone else have these thoughts? Does anyone else care? And if you do, put it in the chat, because I'm about to return there, and that's what I want to know. Is Riot's approach to sales and marketing on this, is it a neat new idea that could invigorate the industry? Is it a thing that might be a curious anomaly but could ultimately damage the industry? Or is it just, it's just going to be a blip? It's not going to be nothing one way or the other. Let's find out in the old chat land here with the few minutes that we have left. Okay, I'm going to scroll down near the end of the comments. Sorry, I unfortunately, very active chat today. This is fantastic. But unfortunately, I can't get to all the comments. Okay, so I'm getting here. Let me back up to where we left off with our TMG hashtags. Here's a little batch. Kabuki Kid mentions, yeah, we are seeing this game as a good deal, when maybe we are just currently overpaying for many other games. That's an interesting point of view on it as a consumer. Wes mentions, this is not standard operating procedure. Most games and movies are announced in advance, and then you will see a review embargo lifted shortly before the release. Never at the same time. That is an interesting point, Wes. Do you think that is because of the way the video game and board game industries operate? Do you think it's because of this is Riot's first game, so a lack of experience and learning from things that work and don't work, a lack of experience in producing a physical product like this, or some other reason for that? That is a good point, though. Very, very interesting. I would love to flesh that out a little bit more. Juan mentions, I love that all the conspiracy theorists came out of the woodwork upon the media blitz, though. I saw things posted on the Dice Tower review within minutes. People. Nyrus mentions, I would like to see a report on how they made the game at this price point. Oh, I recommend listening to both the Secret Cabal Express episode number 18 and the most recent episode of Rolling Dice and Taking Names with Marty and Tony, both of which were released on Monday. Excuse me. In both of those interviews, Chris from Riot Games, he lays out an example of how they came to that price point. He talks about the game development versus the production costs versus the distribution costs versus the other costs and how those build on each other. And he lays it out in both of those interviews, kind of, I think in the last half of those interviews, he kind of actually gives an example of that, the specific thing. So I recommend checking out those interviews. All right, there we go. Oops, I'm going to refresh my chat here one more time, looking for our little hashtag. Okay, a couple more here, then we'll wrap up. Chuck mentions that his comment just scrolled away. Chuck, I was about to read your comment. I'm sorry. Let me try and find it. Oh, here it is. Chuck mentions, I don't think that it will impact the industry because very few companies can afford to take that kind of approach. Oh, you said you even had to repost that. I'm sorry, then it scrolled away. So, okay. So there's one vote that doesn't think it's going to impact the industry at all. Endgame mentions, I think what Riot Games is doing, circumventing the friendly local game shop, is attributed to the fact that they have a fan base and isn't something other companies can do out of their own resources, like Fantasy Flight or CMON. Oh, that is a very, very good point. They do, like I mentioned, they have this captive audience of thousands, if not millions, of players of their game. So they have this built-in audience that they can afford to take this different approach. Yes, that's a good point. If even Fantasy Flight or CMON was to sell direct only, to try that with a game, it probably would not work with the audience amounts that we have available. Very good point there. And that kind of kills some of the worry and skepticism and about the approach. BD Mason mentions, with the standard distribution model, the bulk of the games are purchased by distributors in bulk, then purchased by stores, spreading the risk. True, very true. More people get invested, more different companies get invested in a game, and its success affects more companies. So if Mechs vs. Minions completely just bombs for some reason, it's really only going to affect Riot. It's not going to affect all the FLGSs and distributors out there that also invested. So there you go. There's something where I was looking at if the success of it could be detrimental. It's a potential possible failure of it could actually have less of an impact. So I guess, like Ray would say, the door swings both ways. And we're going to wrap up the way that we begin so many times with Kabuki Kid, who mentions, this reminds me of a bit when 10 Cloverfield Lane was announced as a movie. It was basically produced and shot in secret, so nobody knew about it, and nobody knew about it when it was about to come out. That's true. They did keep that one very hush-hush during its production. I know it surprised a lot of people. I'm going to try and find one more comment here because that did not take as long for me to respond to as I thought it might. So, but I haven't seen 10 Cloverfield Lane, by the way, though. So if it is worth seeing, let me know because I don't watch as many movies anymore as I used to. Okay, 5 more comments here that we'll go through in a mini lightning round. Kabuki Kid mentions Riot already has the online store set up too. They didn't have to do much to add a board game to their online store. That's true. They already have the online retail resources available. Sasha mentions, but a lot of people will complain about prices of other board games because they might not know all of the details that go into their production process, which is true. Trevor mentions, also, if they went through regular distribution, how many would be excited for this game if it ended up having an MSRP of $250? That is true. I will admit, even with everything I've seen about the fantastic components, the amount of playtesting they did, bringing in industry professionals, and the amount of time and care that they took, supposedly building this game, it really looks like they really, took as much effort to craft the best product as possible. Even with all of that amazing stuff that went in behind the scenes and in its production and its components, the price point of what they're releasing it for is something that also excites me about the game. So yeah, their price point is something that is part of their marketing for this product. And that is something that's getting people excited. If it was $250, people might look at it like the deluxe Lord of the Rings set, which is a lot, even more than that. It's like, hey, that is really cool and really handcrafted, but at the price point, it's just a neat thing that's out there. That's cool. So yeah, that $75 price point is definitely something that is part of their marketing, which is neat and interesting that they are in a position where they can do that. Okay, 2 more comments here. People still want to touch the game in whatever form. So can't the small stores buy from the site and give customers a chance to play it? Good question. One that I don't know. I don't know. That's something, hopefully that's something that in the future I will be able to find out about and we'll hopefully see. But I'm going to try and find out about that because that's a good question. And finally, Anthony, who mentions a press embargo is only a few steps removed from announcing games at press events like FFG's in-flight report. So, it's not a stretch to see more press embargoes. Excellent point. Press embargoes do serve their purpose. I think what we saw here was a different animal come into our board game realm, which brought a lot of extra excitement along with it, which added, and some of the pre-announcement hype fueled that a little bit more. So I think we saw, in some cases, a slightly artificially increased buildup of excitement beforehand. I would like to have seen an alternate timeline where the announcements were performed exactly to the way that Riot had envisioned and preferred them to be, to see if that would have made any difference in our own community. But until I develop that trans-dimensional time machine, I'm just going to have to use my imagination. Another thing that we will have to do is using our imagination is continuing this conversation, because for this episode of the Metagame, we are out of time. I'm sorry. So until the next time, this has been a fantastic, awesome, really chat-filled episode. I really appreciate everyone's comments and time that they've taken to put so much stuff into the chat. I could almost at points barely keep up with it. It was scrolling by as I was reading them. So like I said, in the meantime, until our next episode, while you're using your imagination, be sure to imagine going over to both the Dice Tower and the Pair of Dice Paradise YouTube channels, where more of the Dice Tower and my own content is published on a regular basis. And until then, I want to, again, thank everyone for joining me. And until the next time that we can get together and play an episode of the Metagame, I've been Chaz Marler, thanking you, and I'll talk to you again soon. And this is where I start the ending. Boom!
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.